In this new world, each night's dreams are automatically recorded and stored on the small bedside devices people keep within reach of the bed. The devices are unobtrusive things, about the size of a paperback book, with a soft indicator light that pulses once during recording and goes still before morning. By the time a person wakes, the light has already settled. The night's work is done. What remains is a file, sealed inside the device, waiting in the dark of whatever drawer or shelf or pocket the day will carry it to. Most people check the indicator before they check anything else, before the window, before the clock, before the glass of water on the nightstand. The pulse means the device captured something. The stillness means it finished. Both are ordinary. Neither requires a decision yet. The decision comes later. The morning moves the way mornings move, water running, bread warming, shoes found by the door. And somewhere in that ordinary motion, the device gets picked up and placed in its case. The bedside case is a small protective shell, usually cloth-covered or molded plastic, fitted to the device's shape and closed with a magnetic clasp. It does not look like something important. It looks like something a person carries because they carry it every day, the way keys become part of the hand, the way a transit card slides into the same pocket without thought. The case goes into a coat pocket or a bag, and the night goes with it, and the city receives both. What changed when this became the way things were is not easy to name in a single observation. It was not one thing that shifted. It was a slow widening of what counted as a record. Deeds and birth certificates and tax filings had always been records. Pulse charts and prescription histories had always been records. Then sleep joined them. Not all sleep, not every dream from every person, but sleep as a category of material that could be kept, reviewed, and sometimes shared. The infrastructure that grew around this was not dramatic. It was the kind of infrastructure that grows around any material that needs to be stored. Shelves, forms, consent procedures, access levels, and people whose job it is to keep the shelves in order. The Municipal Dream Repository sits on a side street behind the Civic Records Building, close enough that couriers move between the two on foot, carrying sealed transfer envelopes in the same canvas bags they use for everything else. The repository is a single-story building with wide doorways and good ventilation, because the staff spend long hours inside and the storage cases generate a low, steady warmth. The front counter has a bell that nobody uses and a sign that lists intake hours and the current processing wait, which is usually 3 to 5 working days for standard submissions and 1 to 2 for medical referrals. The archivist arrives before intake opens, when the building is still quiet enough that footsteps carry from one end of the corridor to the other. The work of the morning begins with the previous day's received cases lined up on the intake shelf in the order they were logged. A row of bedside cases, in their various cloths and plastics, each tagged with a submission number on a paper strip, each sealed with a consent tab, a small wax or adhesive marker that shows whether the submission was made willingly and with full review of the sharing terms. An unbroken seal means the sleeper signed before sleeping, decided in the clear light of evening. A broken seal with a secondary initialing strip means the sleeper reconsidered in the morning, opened the device, listened to a portion, and chose to submit anyway. Both are valid. The form tracks which kind. What the archivist checks first is not the content. It is the seal. A smudged signature strip means the submission needs to be held for clarification. A consent tap applied after the submission window closed by more than 12 hours means a second confirmation is required before the file enters the catalog. These are not suspicious situations. They are common ones. People changed their minds between evening and morning, and the system was designed to accommodate that, because the alternative, a system that did not accommodate it, would have made submission feel like a trap, and fewer people would have trusted it, and the archive would have been thinner and less useful than it is. So the procedures are careful, and the archivist moves through them without impatience, lifting each case from the shelf, checking the tag, then the seal, making a note. Sometimes a case arrives with the seal intact, but a handwritten note tucked under the tag that says something like, "Changed my mind after breakfast, please return." The archive preserves these refusals as carefully as it preserves consents. The return case goes into a different envelope, logged as submitted and withdrawn, and the record shows that the sleeper's file was never opened. This matters because the record of refusal is itself a kind of information, not about the dream, but about the system working the way it was designed to work. The archivist marks these without comment and sets them aside for the afternoon courier. The archive shelves inside the repository are organized by permission level before they are organized by anything else. This is not the most intuitive arrangement for someone expecting content-based filing, but it is the one that makes sense once the logic is followed. A dream submitted with full public access belongs in a different physical location than a dream submitted for medical use only, because the people authorized to retrieve each category are different, and the retrieval paths should not cross. A researcher looking for recurring spatial patterns in publicly submitted sleep cannot accidentally pull a file flagged for clinical review only. The shelves enforce this, not through locks. Most of them have no locks, but through placement and color-coded markers, and through the understanding that the staff know where things are and why. The listening equipment is in a separate room at the back. It is a plain room with 4 booths along one wall, each booth fitted with a chair, a small desk surface, a connection port for the device, and a pair of headphones hanging from a hook. The headphones are cleaned between uses. There is a small spray bottle and a cloth folded on the desk surface in each booth, and the cloth is replaced every morning. This is not a ceremonial gesture. It is a maintenance routine, the same kind that keeps the intake counter clear and the catalog current. The dreams are ordinary material, and the equipment that plays them back is ordinary equipment, and ordinary equipment is cleaned. The booths have no windows. This is deliberate. The room outside has windows, and the light from those windows is enough to make the corridor feel open and unhurried, but the booths themselves are dim, because listening to a recorded dream is easier when the surrounding light does not compete. Not easier in an emotional sense. The content of the dreams varies too much for any single environmental condition to smooth it, but easier in a practical sense, the way it is easier to read a document in steady light than in glare. The staff do not listen to whole dreams during intake review. They listen to the first minute, sometimes 2, to confirm that the recording is clean and that the file matches the submission form. A full dream can run anywhere from a few minutes to several hours of captured material, and nobody reviews all of it at intake. That is not what intake is for. The click before playback is a small mechanical sound, a brief engagement of the connection port before the audio begins. It happens every time, with every device, in every booth. The staff have heard it so many times that it has become part of the rhythm of the room, the way a kettle beginning to heat becomes part of the rhythm of a kitchen. But it is also the sound that marks a threshold. Something from sleep is about to enter the air of the room. The archivist pauses at that sound without deciding to pause. It is not reverence. It is the same pause a person makes when a door opens and they wait to see who is coming through. Outside the repository, the city carries its own collection of the night's work. On the Transit Concourse, in the long middle hour of the morning commute, people stand under departure boards with their bags against their legs, and one hand resting on the outside of their coat pocket, where the case sits. Some of them are deciding whether to listen. Some have already decided and are waiting for the right moment. A seat, a quieter car, a platform with fewer people pressing close. Some have already listened, at home, before leaving, and are carrying the device now only because the day requires them to carry it, the way the day requires shoes and a transit card and whatever else a person needs to move through it. The concourse has a row of public listening kiosks along the east wall, between the schedule boards and the legal notice counters. The kiosks are narrow standing booths, open at the top, with a connection port and a single pair of shared headphones that are cleaned on a rotation schedule posted inside the booth. They are used mostly by people who did not have time to listen at home, or who want to review a fragment before a clinic appointment or a meeting where the dream might be relevant. The kiosks are not private in any serious sense. The booths are open. The sound does not carry far, but a person standing in one is visible from the concourse. Most people do not seem to mind. The gesture of listening has become ordinary enough that it does not draw attention the way it might have once. What draws attention, still, is a person opening a case and then closing it again without connecting the device. Hands resting on closed lids. This happens more than it might seem. Someone takes the case out, holds it, and puts it back. The decision not to listen is as common as the decision to listen, and the city has learned to read both gestures without comment. A person who closes the lid again is not in distress. They are deciding. The night left something, and they are not ready to hear it yet, or they have decided they do not need to, or they have simply run out of time before the train arrives. All of these are acceptable reasons, and none of them require explanation to anyone. The train arrives. People board. The cases go into pockets and bags, and the city keeps moving, and the night's work rides along inside all of it, sealed and portable and patient, waiting for whatever the day will ask of it. The train car has a particular quality in the middle of the morning, not full, not empty, the kind of occupied where people arrange themselves with a seat between them when they can, and settle into the specific stillness of people who are in motion, but not doing anything about it. Bags on laps, coats folded over arms, the small sounds of the car, the rail beneath, the ventilation above, the occasional shift of someone adjusting their position, fill the space without filling it completely. A few people have their devices out. Not many. 3 or 4 in a car that seats 40, which is about the usual proportion on a mid-morning run. One person has the headphones in and is looking at the floor with the particular unfocused attention of someone listening to something that requires neither action nor response. Another has the device connected, but is not yet listening. The port is engaged, the device is live, but the headphones hang around their neck, not yet raised. They are reading the intake summary on the device's small display screen first, the way some people read the label on a bottle before they open it. The display shows only metadata: duration, recording quality, whether the device flagged any interruptions during capture, a moment where a person shifted too far from the sensor range, or where external sound crossed a threshold that might have affected the recording. The metadata does not tell you what the dream was. It tells you what kind of file you have before you decide to open it. Some people find this useful. Some people ignore it entirely and go straight to playback. Both approaches are common enough that the device's interface accommodates both. The metadata screen can be skipped with a single press, or it can be held and reviewed for as long as the person wants. The device was designed with a lot of small decisions, like that, built into it. The original specifications. There are public records of the committee that drafted them, available in the Civic Archive on the floor above the Dream Repository. Spent considerable time on the question of how much information to surface before playback. Too much, and the metadata becomes a frame that shapes how the dream is heard. A duration of 4 hours carries different weight than a duration of 20 minutes, and a person who knows they dreamed for 4 hours will listen differently than a person who does not know. Too little, and people feel unprepared, which creates its own kind of problem in contexts where preparation matters. A clinic appointment, a legal proceeding, a shared review session with a care provider. The committee settled on a default that shows duration and quality, but withholds the interruption flags unless the person actively requests them. This is still the default. Most devices ship this way. The person with the headphones around their neck raises them now, fits them over their ears, and presses play. Nothing visible changes. They are still sitting in the same seat, coat on their lap, bag between their feet, looking at the floor or somewhere near it. The car moves. The rail sounds continue. From the outside, there is nothing to see except a person sitting quietly on a train, which is not unusual, which is in fact the most ordinary thing in a train car. Whatever is playing through the headphones is not visible on their face in any clear way. This is also ordinary. Recorded dreams do not reliably produce the same expressions as the original experience. The research on this is extensive, and the findings are consistent. And most people who listen to their own recordings in public have already learned that the experience of listening is more internal than it appears from outside. The car slows for a station. Several people get off. A few board. The person listening does not move. There is a station 3 stops along the line where the platform is wide enough that the kiosks are placed there, instead of at the concourse. A secondary set, smaller, 4 booths instead of 8, without the schedule boards nearby. This station serves a district with several clinics and a rehabilitation facility, and the foot traffic there runs differently than at the main concourse. More appointments, more people traveling with a specific purpose, more cases being carried with intention rather than habit. The kiosks at this station get more use per hour than the ones at the concourse, even though the concourse sees more total traffic. The facility staff noticed this early and requested a dedicated intake drop box on the platform so that patients could submit recordings directly before an appointment without needing to go through the main repository. The drop box is a sealed metal unit bolted to the wall beside the kiosks, with a slot wide enough for a standard case and a paper receipt that prints automatically when a case is inserted. The receipt shows the submission timestamp and a retrieval number. The case goes into a locked internal tray that the repository courier collects twice a day. The receipt is small, about the size of a transit stub. Most people fold it and put it in the same pocket as the case, which is now empty, which has a different weight than it did before. Lighter in the obvious sense, but also different in some less obvious way that is hard to describe without sounding imprecise. The case carried something. Now it does not. The pocket knows this even if the person does not think about it directly. The train continues past that station, and the person with the headphones is still listening, and the city outside the windows keeps presenting itself in the ordinary way cities do for moving trains, buildings, gaps between buildings. A water tower, a stretch of wall with old adhesive marks where notices were posted and removed, a crossing where cars wait for the train to pass and then move on. The night travels with all of them. Sealed, portable, patient. The repository opens at 7 in the morning, though the first courier arrives before that, before the front desk is staffed, and leaves a tray of submitted cases in the intake alcove, where a small amber light indicates that something has been received overnight. The person who works the morning sort arrives, checks the light, lifts the tray, and carries it to the processing table without ceremony. This is how most mornings begin here, not with a dramatic arrival, but with a tray of ordinary objects that need to be counted, checked, and assigned a place. The processing table is long and pale, a surface that shows marks easily and is wiped down at the start and end of each shift. The cases that arrive in the morning tray vary in condition. Some are pristine, handled with the care people give to objects they consider fragile or important. Some show the wear of daily carry, scuffs along the lower edge, a hinge that has been opened many thousands of times, a latch that requires a particular angle to close properly. The cases themselves do not affect what is inside them. The recordings are made on sealed internal media that the cases protect but do not alter. Still, people tend to treat well-kept cases as more trustworthy submissions, which is not a formal policy, but a habit that the intake staff have noticed and occasionally discuss. Checking consent seals is the first formal step. Each submitted case arrives with a seal tab on the exterior, a small strip of material that, when broken, indicates the recording has been accessed since it was sealed at the source device. An intact seal means the sleeper submitted the recording without reviewing it first, which is common in clinical referrals and uncommon in voluntary archive deposits. A broken seal means the sleeper listened before submitting, which is allowed and noted. The signature strip runs alongside the seal, and when it is aligned correctly and the ink has not smudged or cracked, the submission is clean. When it is misaligned or damaged, the case goes into a secondary tray for manual verification, which takes longer and requires a follow-up form. Most seals are intact. Most strips are clean. The work is quiet, in the way that sorting work is always quiet. Not silent, because there are sounds, the small mechanical sounds of latches and trays, the occasional cough, the hum of the climate system in the walls, but quiet in the sense that the sounds do not accumulate into noise. Each object handled makes its own small sound, and then the sound ends. The next object makes a small sound of its own. There is a rhythm to this that is not musical, but is steady, and steadiness in this kind of work functions as a form of concentration. On the morning of third frost, morning 7012, a case arrived with its seal unbroken and its strip perfectly aligned, but with a note attached. A small square of paper folded once, tucked under the latch. The note said only that the submission was being reconsidered and that the sleeper might come in person to retrieve the case before it was entered into the system. The archive preserves these notes. The case sat in a holding tray for the standard 3-day window, and on the second day the sleeper did not come, and on the third day they did not come either. The case was entered into the system as a standard voluntary deposit, with the note attached and scanned as part of the file. Refusal, partial refusal, hesitation, and reconsideration are all documented with the same care as the recordings themselves. The archive's position is that the shape of a person's decision to share or withhold is part of the record. The note is as much a document as the sleep inside the case. Archive shelves are arranged by permission level before anything else. This is the first organizing principle, and it shapes the physical space of the repository in ways that are immediately visible to anyone who enters the main storage room. The shelves closest to the reading room are the open access holdings, dreams submitted with full public permission, available to any registered visitor with a standard request form. These shelves are well used, and the cases on them show it. handled regularly, some flagged with small colored tabs that indicate prior requests. The shelves further back require institutional credentials. The shelves in the sealed section at the far end require a court order or a medical authorization form countersigned by the submitting party's designated contact. The physical distance between open access and sealed access is not large, perhaps 30 meters from the front of the room to the back wall, but the organization makes the distance feel meaningful, and people who work in the repository tend to move through the space with an awareness of where they are in relation to the permission gradient, which is not a formal rule, but is a professional habit. Content comes second. Within each permission tier, the holdings are organized by submission date, and then by a category system developed over several decades and revised 3 times. The categories are broad: recurring imagery, single occurrence, fragmented or incomplete, medically flagged, legally flagged, voluntarily annotated, and unannotated. The category system was designed to help researchers and clinicians find what they needed without having to listen to entire recordings, and it works reasonably well for that purpose. It was not designed to capture the texture of what is actually in the recordings, which is a limitation the archive acknowledges openly in its public documentation. The category system tells you what kind of dream it is, broadly. It does not tell you what the dream felt like, or what the sleeper's voice sounded like when they moved through it, or what the light was doing in the recorded imagery. Those things are in the recordings themselves, and the only way to know them is to listen. Listening happens in the reading room, at padded stations with individual headphone sets. The headphone pads are wiped between listeners. This is a maintenance task that falls to the cleaning staff on their regular rounds, done with a cloth and a mild solution in perhaps 40 seconds per station. It is not a notable task. It is the kind of task that exists because public listening requires shared equipment, and shared equipment requires upkeep, and upkeep requires someone to do it regularly without being asked to think about what it means. The cleaning staff do not think about what it means. They wipe the pads, move to the next station, wipe those pads, and continue. By the end of the day, all 8 stations have been serviced twice. This is ordinary maintenance in a public institution, the same as wiping down counters or replacing paper in a dispenser. What is slightly less ordinary is the small protocol that precedes listening at each station, the click before playback. The device at each station requires a deliberate mechanical action before audio begins. A small lever pressed and released, which produces a sound that is not loud, but is distinct. The click was introduced early in the repository's operation, before the current building was built. When the archive occupied 2 rooms and a civic hall on the other side of the district, the reasoning was practical, in a shared listening space. An audible signal before playback gives other people in the room a moment to prepare for the fact that something from sleep is about to enter the air. Even through headphones, even at low volume, the quality of attention in a room shifts when someone begins listening to a dream recording. The click gives the room a beat to adjust. People who use the reading room regularly pause at that sound without thinking about it. It is a reflex, the way a person pauses at a door that opens unexpectedly. The pause is brief, a second, perhaps 2, and then attention returns to whatever it was doing before. But the pause happens. It happens consistently. New visitors to the repository sometimes ask about the click, and the staff explain it simply: it marks the beginning of listening. After a few visits, new visitors stop asking and start pausing like everyone else. The clinic intake wing on the other side of the district operates differently, but the click is there too. The review booths in the intake wing are smaller than the reading room stations, built for one person, with a door that closes fully and a narrow bench and a panel of controls that includes the same lever mechanism. The booths were designed for the first-minute sample protocol, which is the standard clinical approach to dream review. Before a full recording is considered, a clinician listens to the first 60 seconds alone, in the booth with the door closed. This is not because 60 seconds is enough to understand a dream, but because 60 seconds is enough to determine whether the recording is relevant to the presenting concern, and whether proceeding with a full review is warranted, and whether the patient should be present for the listening, or whether the clinician should review alone first and then discuss. These are not trivial decisions. They take less than a minute to make, but they require the minute to be quiet and uninterrupted, which is what the booth provides. In rain, month 18, just after noon, a clinician in one of those booths listened to the first 60 seconds of a recording that showed a recurring hallway, narrow, slightly tilted, the sleeper moving through it with the particular care of someone compensating for something. The hallway appeared in 3 separate recordings submitted by the same patient over a 6-week period. The clinician noted the compensation pattern and, in the appointment that followed, asked about balance, not about falling, not about dizziness, but specifically about whether the patient had been making small adjustments to the way they moved through narrow spaces. The patient said yes, actually, and described something they had not thought to mention as a symptom, because it had started so gradually that it had come to feel like a habit rather than a change. The hallway in the dream had been rehearsing the adjustment for weeks before the patient had words for it. This is not unusual. The intake forms ask, in a standard box near the bottom of the second page, whether recent dreams should be considered relevant to the presenting concern. Most people tick the box without much deliberation. Tired people deciding whether last night belongs with blood pressure and appetite notes do not tend to agonize over the question. They tick the box or they do not, and the clinician notes it either way. The bedside case sits in a clinic locker during appointments, the same way a coat or a bag does. Outside the clinics, in the school district that runs along the eastern edge of the transit corridor, the relationship between recorded sleep and daily life takes a different shape, not clinical, not archival, but social, and governed by a set of manners that children learn early and imperfectly, and spend several years calibrating. The school media room has a set of listening stations along one wall, smaller than the repositories but built on the same basic principle: individual headphones, the lever mechanism, the click before playback. Children use these stations for the structured sessions that appear in the curriculum from the second year onward, guided listening exercises in which a student reviews a fragment of their own recording and then, if they choose, describes it to a small group. The sessions are optional, in the sense that participation is encouraged, but refusal is not penalized, and the teacher's role is primarily to manage the etiquette rather than the content. The content is whatever the child slept through. The etiquette is what the school is actually teaching. During term opening week, a teacher stopped a group of students in the corridor outside the media room. 2 of them had been repeating something from a classmate's recording, a flying dream, specific in its imagery, the kind of dream that sounds vivid when described aloud and becomes easy to imitate as a joke. The teacher did not raise her voice. She said simply that a dream someone had listened to in the media room was not material for the corridor, and that the student whose recording it was had not offered it for repetition. The 2 students understood. They were not disciplined formally. The correction was enough, and the correction was the lesson. That a dream, once replayed, becomes something that can be quoted, and the quoting another person's sleep without their agreement is a particular kind of carelessness that this world has had to name and teach against. The children who grow up learning this tend to carry the habit into adulthood. The slight pause before repeating something heard in a listening session, the check of whether the person who slept it is present and whether they have indicated it is present and whether they have indicated it is shareable. This is not a complicated ethic. It is just manners applied to a new kind of material. The corridor outside the media room has a row of cubbies where students store their things during the school day. Some of the cubbies hold cases, small ones, child-sized, in the sense that children have smaller bedside devices, and the cases that fit them are correspondingly compact. The cases sit in the cubbies, the way lunch containers and spare shoes sit in cubbies, ordinary objects in ordinary storage, waiting to go home with their owners at the end of the day. Some children carry their cases in their bags. Some leave them in the cubbies all week and take them home on Fridays. The choice is personal, and most children make it without thinking about it much, which is the clearest sign that the object has become genuinely ordinary. Not a curiosity, not a burden, just a thing that belongs in the bag or the cubby or the pocket. The way a transit card does, or a house key or a pocket, the way a transit card does, or a house key or a folded note from a parent. The Transit Concourse on the south side of the city is one of the larger ones, built at a junction where 3 tram lines meet a regional rail platform, and it has the particular quality of places that are always in use but never quite full. A steady movement of people through a space designed for more people than it usually holds, so there is always room to stand still without blocking anyone. And people do stand still, more than they might in a narrower concourse, because standing still here has a purpose. Along the eastern wall, there is a row of kiosks, each one a booth roughly the size of a phone cabinet, with a padded seat and a small shelf and a set of headphones on a retractable cord. These are the public listening stations, used throughout the day by commuters who have a few minutes between connections and want to review a fragment before the day takes over. The kiosks are not private in the sense of being sealed. The booth is open at the top, and sound from the concourse comes in. But they are private enough for the purpose, which is a brief, partial listen, not a full night's worth. The headphones are cleaned between users. There is a small dispenser of sanitizing wipes fixed to the inner wall of each booth, and the cleaning staff make a circuit of the kiosks every 2 hours, wiping the pads, checking the cord, making sure the lever mechanism is seated correctly. This is maintenance like any other maintenance, unremarkable, necessary, part of the building's rhythm. The person who does it carries a small cart with the same supplies used elsewhere in the concourse, and the kiosks are simply one more stop on the route, between the bench armrests and the platform handrails. What happens inside the kiosks is ordinary, in the way that reading a message on a transit platform is ordinary. Someone sits, takes the headphones, opens their case, connects it, pulls the lever. There is the click before playback. Then a few seconds or a minute, or however long they have. Most people do not listen to more than a fragment during a transit wait. The recordings are long. A full night is several hours, and the commute is not the place for a full night. The commute is the place for checking in, the way someone might glance at a letter without reading it fully, just to know what is there. Late in the commuter hour, someone in the third kiosk from the left listened for 20 seconds and then closed the lid again. The fragment had been enough, or had been too much for the moment, or had simply run out of time, because the departure board above the platform had changed. Unfinished listening is common here. There is no expectation that a recording be heard in full, or heard at once, or heard in any particular order. The device keeps the file. The listener returns when they return, or they do not return, and eventually they may erase it along with the others from that week. Deletion is not loss in any formal sense. It is just clearing space, the way a household clears a shelf. The legal notice counter sits 20 meters from the kiosks, along the same eastern wall, separated by a stretch of open floor where people stand under the departure boards. The counter is staffed during business hours and handles a range of civic submissions, transit insurance claims, permit renewals, and, on certain days, dream record transfers for evidentiary purposes. The counter does not advertise this last service prominently. There is a small sign, standard size, that lists the types of submissions accepted, and dream record transfer is one item on that list, between property dispute documentation and noise complaint filings. It is not a special category. It is just one of the things the counter handles. The procedure for submitting a dream copy for legal purposes is careful in the way that all civic procedures are careful when the material is personal. A form is required. The form asks for the date of the recording, the name of the submitting party, the nature of the proceeding for which the record is being offered, and a declaration that the recording is being submitted voluntarily and that the submitting party holds the original. There is a consent seal on the copy, the same wax tab used in the repository, the same signature strip, and the clerk at the counter checks these before accepting anything. A broken seal means the copy has been opened by someone other than the owner before submission, which is not necessarily disqualifying, but requires additional documentation. A smudged strip means the identity verification is incomplete. These are not dramatic failures. They are paperwork problems, handled with the same patience applied to any other paperwork problem. Dreams do not settle facts. This is something the legal system has had to state clearly and repeatedly, because there was a period, early on, when there was pressure to treat dream records as a kind of testimony, as if what a person slept through was equivalent to what they witnessed or intended. The courts resisted this, and the resistance became precedent, and the precedent became procedure. A dream record submitted in court is submitted as context, not evidence in the strict sense. It can show that a person had a recurring concern, or that certain imagery appeared in their sleep during a relevant period, or that their sleep was disrupted in ways consistent with reported distress. It cannot show what they decided, or what they knew, or what they meant to do. The distinction matters, and the procedure enforces it. Records are submitted, reviewed by a designated officer, summarized in a written report, and the report enters the proceeding. The recording itself is rarely played in court. On the 5th day of one hearing, during a recess, a copied record was returned to the submitting party unused, because the testimony given that morning had made the context clear without it. The clerk handling the return filled out a receipt, noted the reason, filed the receipt, and handed the case back across the counter. The submitting party put it in their bag and left. The system had been built to allow for exactly this, for the record to travel toward use and then be turned back, without the turning back meaning anything had gone wrong. The market stalls near the concourse's western exit are licensed vendors, each one with a permit displayed at the front of the table. What they sell is not raw recordings. Raw recordings from another person's sleep cannot be sold without a series of permissions that most private individuals do not hold, but edited compilations, assembled by licensed archivists from records that have been voluntarily donated for public use, trimmed and arranged and cleared through the municipal office that handles cultural materials. The compilations are organized by type, spatial sequences for people who work with architecture or construction, color progressions for textile and dye work, speech pattern fragments for actors and voice coaches, recurring structural forms that appear across many dreamers' sleep and have been found useful as reference material for design problems that resist waking logic. During festival week one evening, a pair of craft workers stood at one of the stalls and compared two compilations they had each purchased separately, fragments of impossible stairways, the kind that appear in sleep without regard for how weight is distributed or how a person would actually descend. They were trying to solve a problem in a building they were working on, a curved staircase that needed to feel open without losing structural integrity. The stairway fragments from the compilations gave them a set of forms that waking drafting had not suggested. They bought a third compilation between them and took it back to the workshop. Whether it helped is not the point. The point is that the stalls exist and are licensed and are used for exactly this kind of practical borrowing. The night's geometry put to work in the day's construction. The bedside case appears at the market stalls, the way it appears everywhere else, in bags, in hands, occasionally on the table when someone is making a comparison between their own device's format and the format of a purchased compilation, checking compatibility before committing to a purchase. The vendor at the stall knows the common device types and can usually tell from a glance whether a compilation will transfer cleanly. This is a small expertise, the kind that develops in any market where the product requires a little technical matching, and it is handled without ceremony. A look, a word, a nod, and the transaction proceeds. Back in the repository, the archivist's route through the afternoon takes in the shelves near the back of the main room, where the older records are kept. These are not old in the sense of being historically significant. They are simply records from earlier years that have not been requested and have not been erased, sitting in their cases on shelves organized first by permission level and then by year, and then within the year, by a reference number that corresponds to the intake form. The shelves are clean. The cases are undisturbed. Some of them have not been opened since they were filed, and some of them will never be opened, and the archive does not treat this as a problem. Storage is storage. A record that is never reviewed is still a record correctly kept, and the keeping is the function, not the retrieval. The archivist moves along the shelves with a clipboard, checking that reference numbers match their labels, that cases are seated properly in their slots, that nothing has shifted. This is a routine check, done weekly, and it takes about 40 minutes. The room is quiet in the way that rooms full of closed containers are quiet. Not empty, but still. The stillness of things that are waiting without urgency. Hands rest on cases without opening them, the way hands rest on things that are simply being verified rather than used. The archivist does not listen to anything during this check. The check is not about content, it is about order. And order here means that every case is where the intake form says it should be, and every label is legible, and every permission seal is intact. Toward the end of the afternoon, a request comes in for a record from 3 years ago. The request is from a clinic, routed through the standard transfer system, and it comes with the appropriate permissions already attached. A consent form signed by the person whose record it is, a clinical reference number, a note from the receiving physician explaining the purpose of the review. The archivist locates the case, checks the seal, checks the permissions against the request. The archivist fills out the transfer form and sets the case in the outgoing tray. The case will be collected by the courier service that runs between the repository and the municipal clinics, and it will arrive at the clinic the following morning, and someone there will check it in and place it in the appropriate intake alcove. Eventually, a physician will sit in one of the review booths and pull the lever and hear the click before playback, and whatever is in the recording will be heard in the context for which it was requested. The archivist does not know what is in the recording. That is not part of the job. The job is the transfer, correctly executed, with all permissions in order and all forms filed. Outside, the city is moving toward evening. The concourse is quieter now than it was at peak hour, the kiosks mostly empty, the legal counter closed, the market stalls beginning to pack up. People are heading home with their bags and their cases and their day's receipts and their unfinished business, and in the homes they are heading to, the bedside devices are already in place. on nightstands, on small shelves, on the floor beside the bed, in rooms where the nightstand is used for something else. The cases are there too, or will be soon, set down within reach, the way things that belong near the bed are set down, without deliberation, because the hand knows where they go. The evening comes into the city gradually, not as an event, but as a slow change in what is visible and what is not. The light from windows beginning to matter more than the light from the sky. In the homes near the concourse, the sounds of the street shift, fewer trams, more doors. In a ground-floor apartment, 2 blocks from the eastern exit, a person sits at a small table eating, and the bedside case is already on the nightstand in the next room. They put it there when they came in, before they changed out of their work clothes, before they started the meal. The order is not deliberate in the sense of being planned. It is just the order in which things happen. The case set down first, because the hand releases it first, the way a key goes on its hook before a coat comes off. The meal is ordinary. The evening is ordinary. What happens later, when the meal is finished and the table is cleared and the apartment has settled into its night sounds, is also ordinary. The person moves to the bedroom, sits on the edge of the bed, and opens the case. Not to listen. It is too early to listen, and there is no new recording yet, because the night has not happened. The opening is a check, the kind of check a person might make on a phone before setting it to charge, just confirming that the device is there and functioning and ready. The lever is in its resting position. The connection port is clean. The case is closed again and set within reach, and the person lies down, and the room does what rooms do when the light goes out. In another apartment, higher up in a building on the far side of the concourse, 2 people share a bedroom with 2 nightstands, and on each nightstand there is a case. The cases are different models, one older, one newer, the newer one slightly smaller. But they are both in the same position relative to the bed, equidistant from the pillow, within easy reach of the hand that would find them without looking. This is a small symmetry that developed without being decided on. At some point, the cases simply ended up there, and there they stayed. They do not share recordings. Most people do not, even in households where most other things are shared. The recordings are available to share. There is no prohibition. But the sharing requires intention, requires the conscious act of making a copy and offering it. And most people find that the offer changes something, makes the sleep feel observed in a way that the sleep itself does not feel observed. Some couples do share. Some do it occasionally, for specific reasons. A recurring fragment that seems relevant to something the other person is also experiencing, or a period of disrupted sleep where the recording helps a physician understand what is happening. But the default is separate cases, separate files, 2 devices on 2 nightstands in the same room, recording the same night from 2 different interiors. The city at night is not silent, because cities are not silent, but the particular sounds of the day, the kiosks, the counter, the market stalls, the courier routes, have stopped. What remains is the background of a city at rest, distant traffic, the occasional tram on a late line, the sounds of buildings settling, the sounds of people in other apartments doing the last small things of the evening. And in rooms throughout the city, on nightstands and shelves and floors within reach of beds, the cases are closed and the devices are waiting, the levers in their resting positions, ready for the click that will come in the morning when the night has been gathered and the day begins again. The morning will come the way it always comes, with light finding the edges of curtains and the body registering temperature before thought, and the hand will move before the eyes open, because the hand knows where the case is, knows the distance and the angle, and the fingers will find the latch without searching. This is something that happens in rooms across the city at roughly the same hours, staggered by neighborhood and profession and the particular habits of households. But happening nonetheless, the same small motion repeated in thousands of variations, a hand reaching, a case found, the click before the recording begins to play. Nobody orchestrated this. It became a reflex, the way all morning reflexes become reflexes, through repetition, until the body no longer needed to decide. The city in the hour before full waking is a place of partial attention. People move through it in the state between sleep and full presence, and the recordings fit that state well, because a dream replayed in the first minutes of consciousness meets a mind that is still partly inside the night it recorded. Physicians have noted this. The intake forms at clinics ask not only whether a recording was made, but when it was first played, because a recording heard at 6 in the morning in bed is heard differently than the same recording heard at noon in a review booth. The early hearing is softer, less analytical, more likely to surface the texture of the sleep rather than its contents. Some people prefer it that way. Some people prefer the booth, the distance, the clean separation of night from day. What the city does not do in these early hours is treat the recordings as urgent. This is something that took time to settle into, culturally speaking. The understanding that a night's recording is not breaking news, not a message requiring immediate response, not something that changes the day the moment it is heard. It is more like a letter that arrived while you were sleeping. You can read it now, or you can read it later, or you can set it aside and read it at the end of the week when you have a few of them together and can notice whether they are saying the same thing. The archive staff understood this early because they handled recordings that were days or weeks or years old, and the content did not diminish with time the way urgent things diminish. A dream recorded in the 3rd month of a difficult year was still that dream when it was requested in the 7th month of a better one. Drawers close. This is the sound of the repository at the end of a working day. The soft, successive sounds of drawers being pushed shut along the shelving rows, each one sealing its contents back into the low-level hum of the building's climate controls. The staff who work the late portion of the afternoon shift do this methodically, not rushing, checking that each drawer's index card is facing outward, that the permission level marker is visible from the aisle. It takes longer than it sounds like it should. There are many drawers. The last lights in the intake alcove go off in sequence, not all at once. Someone on the evening cleaning rotation moves through the space with a cloth and a small spray bottle, wiping down the headphone pads in the listening booths, replacing the paper liners on the counter where cases are set during intake. These are small tasks, repeated every day, and the person doing them is not thinking about dreams or recordings or the nature of sleep. They are thinking about the route, the next room, whether the supply closet on the lower floor has been restocked. The booths are clean by the time they leave. The chairs are pushed in. The counter is bare. Outside, the concourse has thinned. The kiosks that offer public listening access run on a timer and begin to dim their screens around the time the last commuter rush has passed. A few remain active for late travelers. The transit authority keeps 3 running through the night for anyone who needs them. But the queues that form in the morning and again in the early evening have dissolved. The departure boards still cycle through their information, still announce platforms and delays and service changes, but the people standing beneath them are fewer, and they are moving with the particular directness of people who know where they are going and want to get there. No one is standing under a board with one earpiece in, half listening to a fragment of the previous night. That is a morning and evening behavior tied to the rhythms of transit, and those rhythms have quieted. The legal counter adjacent to the concourse closes at a fixed hour. The clerk on duty slides the window across and clips the day's forms into their respective folders: submitted cases, returned cases, cases pending permission, verification, and sets them in the outgoing tray for the courier who will collect them in the morning. On the 5th day of a recent hearing, a copied recording had been returned unused, the testimony having proven sufficient without it. The clerk who processed the return noted it in the log with the same neutral handwriting used for everything else: returned, unused, permission seal intact, no copy made. The system had room for that outcome. It had been designed to allow that outcome, because the people who designed it understood that the recordings were not always necessary, that the value of having them available was not the same as the value of using them every time. The market stalls have been folded and latched. During festival week in a recent season, craft workers had gathered at one of the licensed compilation stalls in the evening, comparing fragments of impossible stairways from different anonymous sources, looking for a structural logic they could apply to a waking construction problem. They had found something useful, not a solution exactly, but a way of thinking about the problem that the waking mind had not reached on its own. The stall owner had helped them navigate the search, pulling 3 or 4 fragments that matched their description, playing 30-second samples while they stood at the counter and listened. The click before each sample had punctuated the conversation, and each time it sounded, the group had gone briefly quiet, listening together, and then resumed talking once the fragment ended. The stall was closed now. The samples were back in their indexed cases. The craft workers had gone home with notes. In a school on the north side of the city, the media room has been dark since mid-afternoon. The cubbies along the corridor wall still hold a few cases belonging to students who forgot them at pickup, which happens regularly enough that the school keeps a small labeled bin for overnight storage. The cases sit in the bin without ceremony. They are ordinary objects in a school building, as ordinary as forgotten water bottles or library books left on benches. Someone will collect them in the morning. The etiquette around them, the careful rules about not quoting another child's dream in the corridor, about the difference between sharing and repeating, about what it means to play a recording without asking, is taught early and reinforced often. Not because children are careless, but because the line between curiosity and intrusion is genuinely difficult at that age, and the school has learned that it needs to be named clearly and returned to regularly. By the middle years of schooling, most children have internalized it. They know to pause before speaking. They know that a dream, replayed many times, starts to feel like a fact, and that this feeling is not the same as the dream being a fact. The bin by the cubbies sits in the corridor. The cases in it are closed. Somewhere in the city, a household clears 3 nights of recordings before supper to free up storage space on the older device. This is a routine task, not a solemn one. The recordings are played briefly, a few seconds each, enough to confirm there is nothing worth keeping. And then deleted, the storage space returning to availability with a small indicator light that shifts from amber to clear. The household does not discuss the deletions. They happen the way other minor housekeeping happens, between other things, without marking them as losses. The night was recorded. The recording was heard. The recording was released. The device is ready for the next night. This is how most recordings end. The repository holds the ones that were kept, The ones that were copied and sealed and submitted with consent forms and permission markers and the small wax tabs that show a seal, arrived unbroken. It holds them in drawers arranged by access level, the most restricted on the upper shelves, the general access materials lower, everything indexed and retrievable, and waiting for requests that may come in a week or a decade or not at all. The building is quiet at this hour. The climate controls maintain their steady hum. The drawers are shut. In a clinic on the western edge of the district, the review booths have been dark since the last appointment of the day. The intake forms from the morning session are filed. One of them had included a note about a recurring hallway that appeared in sleep, a short corridor, always the same, always ending at a door that did not open. And the physician had used that note to ask about balance, about the particular quality of uncertainty that comes before a physical symptom is named. The patient had answered carefully. The recording had been sampled for 1 minute in the soundproof booth, the click preceding the playback, both of them listening without speaking. What the physician heard was not a diagnosis. It was a shape, a repeated pattern, something the body had been rehearsing in sleep before it found words for it in waking. The appointment ended with a follow-up scheduled and a note added to the file. The booth was cleaned after. The headphone pads were wiped. The chair was pushed in. The city settles into its night sounds. These are not the sounds of the day. The kiosks are dim, the counters are bare, the shelves are full, and the drawers are shut, and the stalls are folded, and the corridors of schools are empty. What remains is the background of a city that has finished its visible business and moved into the private portion of its hours, the distant traffic, the occasional late tram, the sounds of buildings adjusting to the change in temperature, the sounds of people in apartments doing the last small things before they stop doing things. In rooms throughout the city, on nightstands and shelves and floors within reach of beds, the bedside case is closed, and the device inside it is waiting. The lever in its resting position, the connection port clean, the storage cleared or full or somewhere between, ready for whatever the night will bring. The hand that will reach for it in the morning is resting now. The mind that will listen is not yet listening. There is nothing to listen to yet, because the night has only just begun, and the recording is a thing that happens slowly, over hours, without effort, without intention, the way sleep itself happens. Not decided, not controlled, just arrived at. The body going where it goes when the day is done and the light is out and the room has become the particular kind of quiet that rooms become when the people inside them have let go of the day. The city holds still. Another night's ordinary harvest is beginning. The cases are closed. The devices are ready. The city does not know yet what it will record. What happens in sleep is not monitored, not guided, not shaped by anything the person going to sleep decides to do. They can set an intention. Some people do, writing a word or a question in a small notebook before they close their eyes, hoping the night will take it somewhere useful. But the recording does not care about intentions. It captures what occurs, which is not always what was hoped for, and often has nothing to do with the question written in the notebook. And sometimes circles back to something from 3 weeks ago that the waking mind had considered finished. The notebook sits on the nightstand. The case sits beside it. Neither one influences the other. This is something people learn to accept, usually early. The children who grow up with devices on their nightstands, which is most children in this city, because the devices are issued through the school system at a certain age and returned when the child finishes the upper years, learn quickly that the recording is not a reward for good sleep or a punishment for bad sleep. It is simply what the night produced. A restless night produces a recording. A deep and apparently dreamless night produces a recording. The child who wakes feeling rested and the child who wakes feeling as though they did not sleep at all will both find the indicator light showing the same thing. The night was recorded, the storage is ready, the case is waiting. What differs is what is inside. Families develop their own habits around this. Some households play the recordings together over breakfast, briefly, a few minutes each, the way some households read aloud or share the news. Others treat the recordings as private from the beginning, the device belonging entirely to the person who slept, the contents not discussed unless offered. There is no consensus about which approach is better, and the etiquette guides issued by the city's health advisory do not recommend one over the other. They note only that consistency helps children develop a stable relationship with the practice, and that instability, a household that sometimes shares and sometimes does not, without clear reasoning, can make the recordings feel unpredictable in a way that is harder to manage than either consistent privacy or consistent openness. The guides are updated periodically. The habits of households are not. Somewhere in the city tonight, a person who has not slept well in several weeks is lying in bed with the knowledge that the device is ready, and the case is closed, and the night will be recorded, regardless of whether the sleep is good. This knowledge is not comforting, exactly, but it is stabilizing in a different way. The recording will happen, the night will be documented, and if the pattern of poor sleep continues, there will be something to bring to the clinic. Something the physician can sample in the booth, something that shows the shape of the difficulty rather than requiring the person to describe it from memory at 8 in the morning when they are already tired. The recording is not a solution, but it is a record. And a record is something. The tram that runs the late circuit passes through the outer district. Its windows show the lit interiors of apartments above street level, brief rectangles of warm light moving past as the tram moves, each one a room where someone is still awake or has left a light on, or where the light is on a timer and the person inside is already asleep. The tram does not slow for these, it follows its route. The driver has made this circuit many times and knows the stops without needing to watch for them. And the few passengers in the rear cars are not looking at the apartment windows either. They are looking at their reflections in the dark glass, or at nothing, or at the small screens of devices they carry, finishing something before the day ends. The city outside the tram windows is doing what cities do at this hour. It is not waiting for anything. It is not building toward anything. The recordings that will be made tonight will be made without the city's awareness of them, without ceremony, without the click that precedes playback, because the click belongs to the morning and the morning has not arrived. Right now there is only the ongoing quiet of a city that has finished one day and has not yet begun to process the next. In that quiet, the devices sit in their cases, and the cases sit on their nightstands, and the night moves through the rooms the way it always does, unhurried, taking its time, filling the hours between the last waking thought and the first morning light with whatever it finds there. The hand rests near the case. It does not reach for it yet. There is nothing to reach for yet. The recording is still becoming itself, still accumulating in the device's storage, still being made by the sleeping body that does not know it is being recorded and would not change anything if it did. By morning, it will be complete. By morning, the hand will know to reach. By morning, the click will sound in the room, small and ordinary, the same click that sounds in rooms throughout the city, and the night will begin to be heard. That is later. For now, the case is closed, and the city is quiet, and the night is doing what the night does here, which is the same thing it does everywhere, moving through the dark hours, indifferent to what is being recorded inside it, carrying the city toward morning at the same rate it always has, neither faster nor slower, the way time moves when no one is trying to measure it,